This is Ken Lightburn. I'm president of Nature's Approved and Assured Organics, and recently I received a rather remarkable article about Alzheimer's written by Dr. Mary Newport. And today I'm in her home interviewing Dr. Newport and her husband Steve and trying to get some understanding of the remarkable results she achieved in the partial reversal of Alzheimer's using coconut oil. Dr. Newport, could you give us some of the history behind this achievement?
Yes. Well, Steve and I grew up in Cincinnati. We've been married for 37 years. And Steve has functioned as an accountant and bookkeeper for my practice for many years, working from home, taking care of our children. And he was doing quite well with that until about 2001, 2002, when he began having trouble with some of the more complex parts of his accounting, difficulty doing payroll and annual tax returns and that type of thing became very difficult for him. But at that point, I thought, well, maybe our practice had just gotten a little bit more complicated. However, when he began having problems remembering if he'd been to the bank and the post office on a given day, I knew that that was not normal. So we got him to a physician to evaluate him, and the doctor at that time felt that most likely he had a problem with depression, and Steve was depressed at that point. Tried antidepressants, but we continued to see him worsen over time, and right around 2003, we moved from Dunedin in Florida to Spring Hill. I was opening up a new neonatal intensive care unit here. Steve had great difficulty learning this very small town, which has very few north, south, east, west arteries. He had never had a problem with that before. He could always follow a map, but he had considerable difficulty with that. And he also started spending many hours out in his garage looking for something. At the beginning of the day, he would decide he needed to find like a hitch for his truck, and when I would come home in the evening, he would still be looking for it.
And what age was he when this happened?
At this point, he would have been about 53.
So this is early onset Alzheimer's?
It's early onset. Under age 65 is considered early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
So we got him to a neurologist at that point. I called our local Alzheimer family organization to get a recommendation, and we saw a neurologist, and he did a complete evaluation on Steve, including an MRI, which was actually normal at that time. It ruled out things like vascular dementia, strokes, other things that might cause these problems. And some blood work, but one of the tests that he did at that point was called the mini mental status exam, and this is a 30-point test. It tests for very common items related to memory, your location, orientation in time, those types of things, following instructions, writing out a full sentence, those types of things are on the test. And a perfect score is 30, and Steve scored only a 23 at that time. Well, you and I and the average person would score 30. These are not difficult questions. So the neurologist felt that he did in fact have some type of dementia. These doctors want to see progression in the disease, worsening of the disease, before they want to label it as Alzheimer's disease, and they want to rule out everything else. So he continued to evaluate Steve periodically, about every 6 months, and about a year after the first visit, he did feel that Steve was worsening. So he put him on a medication for Alzheimer's called Aricept, and then over the next year, with continued worsening, he put him on an additional drug called Namenda. Both of these have to do with allowing more of the neurotransmitter, which is the chemicals that allow the neurons to communicate, making those more available.
Right.
We did see worsening, and the summer of 2007.
You mean under the drugs? He was still worsening?
Even in spite of the drugs.
He was
these
still
drugs,
right.
Basically their claim is that they will hopefully slow down the progress of the disease. They don't result in improvement.
Right.
So he did, in fact, continue to progress. And the summer of, in August of 2007, I had a particularly busy month in the newborn ICU. I was getting home late every evening, and he had a 3-week period during which this was happening, and I noticed that he was getting rather thin. He had always been able to cook for himself, get himself food when I was gone. Had not been a problem, but I got him on the scale and he had lost 10 pounds over a period of about 3 weeks.
Wow.
So I realized, you know, when I would come home from work, I would ask him, have you gotten anything to eat? And he would say, oh, yeah, no, I'm fine, no, I'm not hungry. And so I assumed he'd gotten dinner, but, you know, I started looking for evidence. I couldn't find any evidence that he was getting something to eat. So at that point, I felt that he was getting considerably worse. And we did see continued worsening over the next few months into early 2008. He developed a much more significant tremor. He had more and more difficulty finding words and putting words together. His personality was evaporating, and that's something that you see with Alzheimer's disease. There was much less smiling, much less interaction. When we would talk to each other, we were on a different wavelength. His answers weren't really appropriate, you know, to the conversation that we were having. So this was all very distressing. So, you know, going into the spring, things were looking a little hopeless, and I was always keeping my eyes open for clinical trials, new drugs. Our hope had always been that these other medications would slow it down enough that when the right drug came along, that Steve would still be there to, you know, it would be available to him, to, you know, that he could respond to it. So in May of 2008, there were ads in the paper for a couple of clinical trials. And I had a couple days off and scheduled 2 back-to-back screenings for these 2 different drugs. Both of them have to do with attacking the beta amyloid plaques, the plaques that people know are associated with Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, the night before the first screening, I thought, well, what if Steve gets accepted into both studies? What if he does well? We have to pick one. You can't be in 2 different clinical trials.
Of course not.
Yeah. So I decided to do some internet research, looking at the 2 drugs closely, the risks and the benefits. And it just so happened that I came across one of them in a press release with another treatment that was coming along that actually showed improvement in the cognition or the memory of people that have Alzheimer's disease. And you never see that. You never see that associated at this point with an Alzheimer's drug. So I was extremely curious and wanted to learn more about it. Mm-hmm. So I continued doing research, and I found a patent application for this particular product. They went into detail about Alzheimer's disease and what's known about it. And one of the things they discussed at length was a problem that they now know about Alzheimer's disease. They call it diabetes of the brain, or brain starvation. And what they have learned is that there are certain areas of the brain associated with Alzheimer's that have difficulty getting glucose into the cells. Right. And glucose, or sugar, is the very basic energy that we all use, you know, for most of the time for all of the cells in our bodies. And what happens with Alzheimer's is that there's something going on with the insulin receptors. You need insulin to get glucose into a cell, and you need insulin receptors to act normally for that to happen too. Mm-hmm. And there's a problem with those receptors, and glucose cannot get into the cell. Mm-hmm. So the cells start dying off, and they think this happens at least 10 or 20 years before you start seeing symptoms.
People that are headed for Alzheimer's with perhaps a genetic disposition could be on the downward path for 10 to 20 years?
10 to 20 years. It could be even longer. They've even seen terrible. In their 30s, they've looked at PET scans of people that have a certain genetic profile, and that they see decreased metabolism of glucose even at that point in some of these people. So what these people developed, the product that they developed, is actually something that's been around for a long time. It's medium chain triglyceride oil, or MCT oil for short. And it's been known since the 1960s, or maybe even sooner, that the liver metabolizes medium chain triglyceride oil to ketone bodies. And ketone bodies are very simple molecules that your cells can use as an alternative fuel. Dr. George Cahill in the 1960s discovered that the neurons can use ketone bodies as an alternative fuel to glucose. And this has a lot to do with why we were able to evolve as a species. During times of feast, we would build up carbohydrate or glucose stores in our body and add fat to our bodies. And during times of famine, when there was no food for days and days, you would first use up your carbohydrate stores, your glucose stores, and then switch over and start burning fat and making it to ketone bodies. And the ketone bodies go directly into the brain circulation, and the brain can use them as a fuel. So your body would basically switch over from using glucose to ketone bodies.
Right.
So what these people, they looked at this biochemical fact, and it occurred to them that if people eat medium chain triglyceride oil, they will have ketones circulating. Well,
this fits in, by the way, with weightlifters use medium chain triglycerides often just before they perform, because it gives them a burst of energy to enable them to lift heavier weights.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's feeding the muscles as well as the brain.
Right, and much of it is converted directly to energy instead of being stored as fat.
Right, the liver processes it straight away.
Right, to energy. So the thing is, in this country, we're using oils that don't contain medium chain triglycerides normally. Soybean oil, olive oil does not, safflower, none of the peanut oil, none of the common oils that we use contain medium chain triglycerides.
Right.
However, what I learned from this patent application is that medium chain triglyceride oil is derived from coconut oil.
Right.
Well, when I read that, I knew I'd seen coconut oil in the health food stores, and it just set me off on a frenzy of research that particular night. I looked online about coconut oil. I had to remind myself which are the short and medium chain, long chain fatty acids. I figured out from a nutritional breakdown of coconut oil that it was about 60% medium chain triglyceride oil. And looking at the dosage that they used for their studies, which was about 20 grams of medium chain triglyceride oil, I figured out that about just a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil would give you 20 grams of medium chain triglyceride oil.
2 tablespoons, that's not a big dose.
It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Unfortunately, that night, it was too late. It was about 1 a.m. at the point that I thought I have to go to sleep. We had a 9 a.m. appointment in St. Pete, but there was no way to get coconut oil before that.
Right.
So we went on down for the screening for Steve. And he had an MMSE done at that point. And the very disappointing news was that he needed to have an MMSE of at least 16 to qualify for the study, and he only scored a 14.
A 14. So this is compared to a normal of 13. He was at the 14
at the 14 level, which is getting quite down in the low moderate range.
Yes.
So he did not qualify, and we were very shocked, very disappointed. Yeah. The doctor there said, well, let's evaluate him a little bit further while you're here and we'll talk. You know, she spent a considerable amount of time with us. We really appreciated that. And she said, let's do this clock study. It's very specific for Alzheimer's disease. So she asked Steve to draw a clock. And it was, you or I would not look at that and see that this is a clock. And Steve later said that he really could not even picture what a clock looked like at that point. Several random small circles and several numbers, not even 1 through 12. And the physician took me aside, and she said, you know, he's getting a little worse than moderate. He's starting to get into the severe range. So we left very distressed. We knew there was a screening the next day. There was still a little hope there that maybe he would get into that drug trial. It happened to be a vaccine to remove beta amyloid from the brain. I recalled that I had seen coconut oil at a health food store. I had always wondered, why is coconut oil there? There's some misconceptions about it.
Sure.
And so we stopped at the health food store. I thought, what have we got to lose? You know, we're going to try this. In the patent application, the studies that they did showed that about half the people, almost half, 47%, had an improvement in their cognitive scores, their memory scores, over the period of time that they tested. And the other half declined very slightly. So I felt, well, this is something that could improve them and perhaps at least stabilize. And, you know, I felt like, okay, we can live with where we're at now. Even if he stays the same, you know, we can live with this. So, you know, what have we got to lose? We're going to try this. So we picked up the coconut oil, and in the studies they had given the dose at breakfast. So I thought, okay, tomorrow morning, you know, we'll give it to him. And he was scheduled the next day for another screening at in Tampa.
Right.
And this was at 1 in the afternoon that he was scheduled. So I went ahead and put just over 2 tablespoons in his oatmeal. We had a little, coconut oil tends to be semi-solid at room temperature. So I thought, well, we'll put it in a little hot cereal, and that will melt down. He'll have something to eat it with instead of just taking it right off the spoon. And I took an equivalent amount myself. I thought, I'm not going to make him take anything I won't take. Good idea. So he you know, had breakfast, and then several hours later we were heading down to Tampa, and I tried to help him, you know, remember things like, what is the season? It was spring. He couldn't even remember the word spring. We must have talked about it 10 times. He could not come up with the word over and over. And the month, you know, the date, things like that, he couldn't remember. The last time we had been there, could not remember the town, the county, you know, even though we'd been there many, many times.
Right, but you later found that it takes approximately 3 hours for the coconut oil to have an effect.
Right, right. So that explains why, you know, a couple hours later we weren't seeing anything. But what happened when he got there for the test, they took him away to do the MMSE. And when he came back, he was actually kind of disappointed. He said, I don't think I did very well. And but the research assistant came in, and she started taking his blood pressure, and she talked about drawing blood. And I said, well, what's going on here? How did he do? And she says, oh, didn't he tell you? He got an 18.
So he went from 14 to
18 the very next day.
In 1 day?
In 1 day.
With 2 tablespoons of coconut oil?
Right. And
that's astonishing.
And it kicked in. His memory kicked in.
What,
he remembered.
His memory kicked in?
Kicked in at that point for the test.
Right, right.
He remembered it was spring. He knew he was in Tampa, in Hillsborough County. He knew he was at they named the building he was in. He knew what floor he was on. You know, things that he could not recall at all. You know, for the previous test.
Absolutely marvelous.
So he qualified for that study, and
Wonderful.
We were ecstatic.
Yes.
And at that point, I didn't know for sure, was it coconut oil, or was it pure luck, or, you know, what happened? I wasn't 100% sure. So I thought, well, but we're going to continue this.
Right.
And I had read in their application that some people did improve their very first day, the very first time they took it. So I thought, okay, well, he's maybe perhaps one of these people. So we're going to keep this going. And the next few days, I did continue to give it to him for breakfast. And then I started researching everything I could get my hands on about coconut oil, looking for recipes. Basically decided that maybe we'll convert over or do a little more of our cooking, you know, at other meals, you know, with coconut oil, adding it to that. And so I started researching ketones, and I came across the name of Dr. Richard Veitch. So I started researching ketones, and I came across the name of Dr. Richard Veitch, right, who is at the NIH in Maryland.
And ketones are the end product that you, first of all, you have the coconut oil. Part of that is 60% is medium chain triglycerides, and they're transformed by the liver, is it?
By the liver.
By the liver into ketone bodies, which provide the fuel for the brain cell.
Right, right. And the interesting thing about ketone bodies, when you have ketosis going on, it increases circulation to the brain.
So you're getting both.
So you're getting even more, of the ketones circulating to the brain, and the neurons apparently can pick them up very easily.
So this is one of the friendly saturated fats. This is one of the good saturated fats.
In fact, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have found that even some of the longer chain saturated fats actually which are in coconut oil too, actually raise HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol. The total cholesterol may go up a little bit, but it's actually the good cholesterol that goes up, and the LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, tends to come down. And
HDL, by the way, has been used in experiments to clear plaque from the arteries too.
Right. It actually helps clean out the arteries.
Clean out the arteries. So HDL's the good cholesterol,
the good cholesterol.
And it raises that as well using coconut oil.
Right.
And that's what you found with Steve, isn't it?
Yes. It's actually, we have measured his cholesterol profile several times since we started this. Of course, we're concerned. He ended up, we added coconut oil then to lunch and dinner. And so we're very concerned, is this going to cause a problem with his cholesterol?
And it improved.
It improved. His total cholesterol has stayed under 200. His LDL came down. It had been slightly above normal before this. And the LDL's come down in the normal range. And the HDL, which had been on the low end, has actually increased, quite significantly. He's got a beautiful profile, and his triglycerides run about 70s.
Wonderful.
Which, most people would be overjoyed to have a cholesterol profile like that. So he is just one man.
Right. But that fits with other studies, though. I mean, common belief is that saturated fats are bad for you. But the fact is that a lot of saturated fats, some saturated fats are very good for you. Right. And this is astonishing that it's in this way as well. The thing about coconut oil is most of the saturated fat, I think about 70% of the saturated fat are the medium chain triglycerides. Yes. So much of that is converted to ketone bodies and used for energy right away rather than being stored as fat. Right.
One of the oils, the lauric acid, which is also one of the medium chain triglycerides, has a lot of other antimicrobial properties to it.
Right.
Kills certain viruses, bacteria, fungi, and protozoa.
Right.
And it just so happens that lauric acid and other medium chain triglycerides are in human breast milk. They make up about 10 to 17% of the fats in human breast milk.
Right.
And the lauric acid is known to help protect babies from infection.
So now you've done experiments feeding it to premature babies.
Well, premature babies, back in the late 1970s, we started giving MCT oil to premature newborns to help supplement their feedings because they knew it was absorbed very easily. It doesn't require enzymes from the pancreas to digest it. It's just absorbed directly through the intestine to the liver. And then it's converted to energy. And so we used to supplement their feedings with it. And now they add MCT oil, coconut oil, and or palm kernel oil to all of the infant formulas here in the United States.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And the palm kernel oil is another oil that also contains a lot of medium chain triglyceride. But in this country, it's very hard to find. Coconut oil is very readily available.
Yes. But it's still amazing. Most people... the common belief is that coconut oil is bad for you. Of course, the studies back in the 1940s, etc., that were done on coconut oil used hydrogenated coconut oil.
Right.
And you should never consume hydrogenated coconut oil or any hydrogenated fats. They'll all clog your arteries and lead to an early demise. So you should use virgin organic coconut oil rather than, and never use a hydrogenated coconut oil.
Yeah, stay away from any kind of hydrogenated oil. They convert to the trans fats that we're all learning more and more about that seem to be at the basis of many of these diseases that are becoming more prevalent, diabetes and heart disease. There was
an epidemiological study done of some South Pacific islands many years ago, and their diet consisted of coconut, fish, and taro, which is a root vegetable, and they found that the population had no Western diseases. Now, part of that population migrated to New Zealand, And when they were studied there, they were found to have switched over to a Western diet, and they were getting all the Western diseases. So it certainly has backed up the fact that it has so many beneficial health properties. And it goes against what is still common belief that coconut oil is not good for you.
Right, right. I think back in the 1950s, there was a big push to get certain brands of shortening that were very stable, that happened to be made with hydrogenated oils on the market. Coconut oil was one of the main competitors. Yeah. Coconut oil is very stable at room temperature. It can stay at room temperature for at least 2 years. Yes. It has a very long shelf life. The whole point of hydrogenating these other oils is to create a very long shelf life. So coconut oil would have been the big competitor, and tariffs were put on coconut oil at that time. It was coined as the artery clogging fat at that time, right. And that's become a prevalent myth in our society today. Let's go back to get Steve's input on sort of before and after the coconut oil, because I found it remarkable. Tell me what it was like to take coconut oil the first time, Steve.
It energized me. It just came me alive. Before this, I didn't think I have anything to look for.
And you said at one stage that it was like switching on a light.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I was.
And that was within 1 day.
In 1 day.
In 1 day, you felt better and healthier from it. Yeah. That's amazing.
And I couldn't imagine how it did so fast.
No.
And then my mom started using it.
Really?
She has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And from all of that, these people are making a cure.
Right.
And there's no problem. It was like seriously, it was just like a light bulb came on me. And it didn't take a long time. It all of a sudden I felt like a different person. I felt like a different person because I hadn't had that feeling of that way at all.
And you were saying how his personality,
right.
tell a story about his personality. I think that's amazing too.
Yeah. Steve, one of the things that happens with Alzheimer's is the personality just slowly evaporates. And the person that you know as your husband or your mother or your father just kind of slowly disappears. They start to appear, seem lost. Conversation disappears. The animation in the face disappears. I was feeling a lot more like Steve's evil stepmother than his wife in the winter of 2008, before this happened. I had to make him take his medication. I had to make him eat, and he wasn't happy about that. We couldn't bounce things off each other like we used to, talking about things. And when we continued the coconut oil, I decided we're going to keep this going. By about the 4th or 5th day, what we saw was a huge difference in Steve's personality in the morning. He had been very confused, very lost, extremely slow, couldn't find a utensil to eat, couldn't get water. And what we saw, he would come bouncing out of the bedroom, alert, talkative, making jokes, smiling, laughing. And I thought, oh my gosh, my Steve is back. His personality came back. And about the 5th day, I remember, sitting at the kitchen table, and we looked at each other and we said, oh my gosh, our life has changed.
Wonderful.
Our life has changed, and we're going to keep this going. And
wonderful. And you've been able to go back. You now mow the lawn, do the gardens, and a lot of things. And the reading has started to come back too, right?
Yeah.
So you read a little now, but not the novels you used to. But you said you read a book on the 36 steps.
36-hour day.
The 36-hour day.
It's a classic book about Alzheimer's disease.
Right. Yeah. And I gave you some laughs.
Oh, God, yeah. It was just, how in the world did that happen so fast? You know, and I haven't stopped it. I feel like 1,000 years. And 2 years ago, oh, I was terrified. And now I've got my life back.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you say there's no miracle in this thing, God made this stuff and to make him could be able to get those people to be able to get the people that we need to get. There will be a whole lot of people.
Could help a lot of people.
A whole lot of people. And you know, and people have been holding it back or just didn't know about it.
Didn't know. I think that's it's news. It's still news, and it takes a long time for the word to get around, which is why we want to make this video and put it where people can read it. And let's hope you get a lot more interviews too, and get even further information about it. But you're also very interested in Dr. Veitch's work. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that.
Yes. As I was researching all of this with the ketones, I happened to come across his name in Wikipedia, Dr. Richard Veitch, that he was an expert in the area of ketones. And he happens to be at the NIH for many years in Rockville, Maryland, near Washington, D.C. And he has been interested in ketones since actually the 1990s that he's been researching this. And he's published several articles, and others have too, about the therapeutic implications of ketone bodies. There are many other diseases that have a similar problem of glucose uptake in the brain. The list includes Parkinson's disease, Huntington's chorea, multiple sclerosis, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which they've been looking for a cure for, and all of these diseases for many, many years. Even type 1 and type 2 diabetes. It's not just the brain, but other organs in the body that are affected, you know, with a problem of glucose uptake and insulin resistance.
Right.
That ketones can potentially help. Traumatic brain injury is another very major thing affecting our soldiers and many people, you know, and auto accidents, you know, things like that that could benefit from the ketones.
Premature babies.
Yeah, premature babies.
They're already getting it in one form, but that more specific might help.
Yeah.
And what about plain old memory?
Yeah, just plain old memory for prevention. This process does start happening at least 10 or 20 years, maybe longer, you know, before you start seeing symptoms. So, you know, potentially you can help keep these cells alive and functioning, and perhaps in many people it will prevent a disease.
So you think that in countries where they eat a lot of coconut oil, they're going to have less Alzheimer's develop?
Yeah, there's
less of these diseases.
There's actually a study in India, from India. They looked at an area of India where coconut is used very predominantly. Coconut oil, coconut milk. They eat a lot of curry there, that type of thing. And they looked at the types of dementia. And in this country, Alzheimer's is far and away the most common form of dementia. In that country, it's 2% of their dementias is Alzheimer's disease.
Really?
In that, right,
only
in that
2%.
part of India, only 2%.
I see.
I thought that was most interesting. Alzheimer's is very uncommon in the Philippines, for example, where they're one of the largest producers of coconut oil.
And consumers.
And consumers.
Right.
They have low rates of cardiovascular disease in that country as well.
Yes. Yeah. We actually get our coconut oil from the Fiji Islands.
Ah, yes. So back to Dr. Veitch, I started calling him. I had a million questions. I didn't really even tell him at first what I was doing with Steve, but I had a lot of questions about coconut oil and medium-chain triglycerides and ketones, and about this product that was going to be coming out. We discussed that, and he was very kind. He answered, you know, all of my questions. And a couple weeks later, I thought, oh, I need to tell him, you know, what I did with my husband and the results that we were getting.
Yes.
I had Steve. He drew a clock again, and it was amazingly different, improved. There was an actual circle like a clock, and he drew spokes, I think, to try to line up the numbers, and he had a complete the numbers were complete all the way around the clock,
Great.
as you would expect a clock. It's not a beautiful clock, but it was a vast improvement from the previous, and this was 2 weeks later.
And was this 2 weeks after?
This was 2 weeks after we started the coconut oil.
Oh, really?
Already.
So you'd gone from an unrecognizable object to a clock.
An actual clock that somebody would look at it and say, okay, that's a clock.
That's a clock, right.
So I told Dr. Veach about what I had done, about how I felt he had improved so dramatically,
yes.
and his clock drawing. And Dr. Veach said, can you fax me the clocks? And so I did. I faxed it to him. And he called me back and he said, wow, this is quite amazing. This is quite extraordinary. So he was very cautious, of course, at first. And he was a little surprised that the levels that we could get from medium-chain triglycerides would be high enough levels to affect somebody this way.
Yes.
Dr. Veach is making one of the ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate is one of the prominent ketone bodies, and he is able to synthesize this in his lab. Right. He's been able to make it for several years now, and he is hoping to study it in humans. He's been testing it in mice so far, and right now he is doing toxicity testing in humans. He has gotten funding to do that.
And so far they're going well.
So far going very well. He's getting levels in people 10 times higher than what we can possibly get with the oil by ingesting the oil.
So that's something
without
really
any adverse effects.
If his ketones became available in the future, that might have another step of improvement. That'd be great.
I think there's a good chance that people could improve even more dramatically.
And how long do you think before that's available?
Well,
if it moved along nicely.
If it moved along perfectly, it would probably be at least 4 years or so before it would actually come to market after studies and getting FDA approval.
Yes.
It would probably be at least 4 years or so before it would actually come to market after studies and getting FDA approval.
Yes.
So in the meantime, what we can do as a temporary fix, so to speak, is to use coconut oil and MCT oil to help provide a level of ketones in the body to hopefully slow down the progress, stabilize the disease, and in some cases even improve, such as Steve has improved.
Right.
Steve, in 2008, shortly before, in conjunction with the screenings that we were doing, he had another MRI. And he had the normal MRI in 2004. Well, this time he did have considerable atrophy in the brain, considerable shrinkage in the areas that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. The hippocampus and the amygdala, and even the frontal and parietal lobes were quite shrunken already.
So, there's a possibility, it seems, from Dr. Veach's studies with mice that the ketone bodies can actually assist with new neurons being developed in the brain. So maybe there's some possibilities there.
Yes, it looks like ketones might be more than just an alternative fuel for the brain. They may have to do with actually helping new neurons to grow and new nerves to grow. So there's a considerable potential in that regard for reversal of the disease, over a period of time. We have continued to see some improvements with Steve over the course of the last year that we've been doing this. Some things didn't happen right away. When I wrote the article in last July, 2 months after we started this, Steve still had a weird gait. I mentioned that in the article. He would walk very slowly. He couldn't run anymore. He would pick his feet up unusually high when he walked. It was kind of a classic walk for Alzheimer's disease. That has disappeared. He can actually run again if he wants to. He has a normal gait. He had visual disturbance. He talked about that a little bit. He had not been able to read for almost 2 years. And he explained to me that it was like the words went into little pixels and they would move around on the page, so he couldn't really read. He would just put it down. And that disappeared after about 3 or 4 months of taking the coconut oil and the MCT oils. And his reading comprehension, he felt has started to improve recently, where he can actually pick up something and read it. Instead of reading the same line over and over and over to try to understand it, he can now read parts of it. We had an interesting thing happen with the 36-hour day where he came out, and he apparently had been reading this book for a couple of hours, and he came out and there was a section about safety, and he was laughing his head off because there was a discussion about hunting and Alzheimer's disease. And he said, I can't imagine anybody would want to go hunting with somebody that has Alzheimer's disease. But it was about gun safety.
Right.
So we had quite a laugh about that.
No, we're not recommending hunting.
No, we're not. We are not. And then the last really 4 to 5 months, it's been more and more noticeable that his short-term and recent memory is back. He basically was living in the moment before. He really seemed to have no concept of what happened when, earlier today, yesterday, weeks ago, many things that he was forgetting. And now he, has quite good recall of trips that we've taken. We've been to Washington, D.C., we've been home to Cincinnati, things like that. He'll remember afterward. And
that's wonderful. That's astonishing to have continued development and improvement, and the suggestion is that maybe it's from new neurons being set up,
exactly,
or maybe new connections amongst old neurons, but something new is happening, and that's just fabulous.
Yeah, Dr. Veach, he can get levels considerably higher, and he's doing the toxicity testing now. And basically, what they do is take healthy volunteers. They start with low levels, slowly increase the dose over time to look for adverse effects. And at this point, they've gotten up to levels 10 times as high as what we've been able to get, with Steve taking coconut oil or MCT oil, and without any adverse effects.
That's wonderful. Wonderful.
So this is a very, very hopeful thing, for many diseases. I gave a list before. Another to mention is Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, a very devastating disease. These people may also benefit from this particular treatment.
Yes.
So Dr. Veach is planning to study Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, hopefully coming up soon. The big problem is that he can only make about 10 pounds a week of this ketone ester in his lab. Well, that's enough to test people for toxicity, but considering how many millions of people now have Alzheimer's disease, it's about 5.3 million that are estimated to have it. He's going to need tons of the ketone ester.
Yes.
He's going to need a facility to make it in large enough quantity to study it.
So he's looking for financiers to build a large facility, and he'll be looking for that almost immediately after his human trials are finished.
Exactly, after the toxicity studies are done. Then, in order to be able to study a disease such as Alzheimer's, you need to study thousands of people, really.
So he'll need a larger plant even for that.
Right, he'll need a large plant just to do the studies.
So it's going to take a lot of money and some time yet before the full benefits are had from that.
Right.
From that ketone body.
And it's going to take a process. It's going to probably take several years, before it would come to market. However,
in the meantime,
we can do coconut oil. Right.
Right. Well, I find my tennis improves and I feel more alert when I increase my. Since reading your article, I've increased my consumption of my own coconut oil. So
yeah, right. I
was using it before, now I'm using more of it.
Yeah. I think for prevention, I have Alzheimer's on both sides of my family.
Oh, really?
So I feel that I'm high risk, and our children are very high risk for this. So I'm using it for prevention.
Yes.
I myself eat probably the equivalent of 3 or 4 tablespoons a day of coconut oil. We incorporate it into our cooking. We've basically eliminated most of the other oils and fats from our diet, and have gone to mostly using coconut oil. And we've enjoyed it. It's wonderful. There are wonderful recipes out there. There are recipes on your website.
Recipes on yours.
Yeah, there are some little books, written about with coconut oil recipes, and a lot of people are working on it now. A lot of people who are doing this. I should also mention that I've had quite a few people over the last year contact me. In October of '08, the St. Petersburg Times here ran an article about it, and it went viral on the internet, so to speak. It got into many newsletters, and I've had very many people contact me for questions, but I have a file folder that's about 2 inches thick now of people who have emailed me or written me letters telling me how their loved one has improved
already.
after starting to take
so this has
coconut
moved out
oil.
from being a one case study with many observations of that one case to what?
To dozens and dozens.
Dozens and
yeah.
dozens.
And then I've read on message boards, you know, there are some message boards for people who have family members with Alzheimer's.
Right. So
and there are discussions on these message boards,
right.
Lengthy discussions going on page after page after page of people that are trying this, that are having some results from it.
Right.
So it is beyond just Steve. It would be wonderful if coconut oil could be studied as, you know, a clinical trial in and of itself.
But it won't happen because you can't study a natural food, and only the government could afford to do that.
Right, right.
And
A drug company
I
is
think
not
they're
going
busy
to
with other expenses right now.
A drug company is not going to study coconut oil. It's already there. It's already on the shelf.
Right.
So, you know, my personal feeling is there's no harm in trying this. This is something, an oil that millions of people in the world use now. They have for millennia. I mean, maybe for millions of years, as far as we know. That you know, our species evolved most likely in areas that the coconut was prominent.
So you're saying that dozens of people now have reported positive results using coconut oil to treat their loved ones who have Alzheimer's. And this is very significant. It's a small number so far, but you know, the forecast is that we'll have 50 million people, you say in your article, we'll have 50 million people with Alzheimer's by the year 2050.
Right.
President Obama, I think we could save some money with some coconut oil consumption.
Right, right.
And
If you think
save
about
the health plan.
Right, right. Yeah, Dr. Veach estimates he needs about $15 million for a plant, you know, to do these Alzheimer's studies, to have
right.
a facility that can make this in quantity and study it in Alzheimer's disease, that he needs a minimum of $15 million. And if you look at 15 million people by the year 2050, that are expected to have, it's $1 each. It's $1 per person. I think that's a worthwhile investment.
Right.
In our future.
And $1 per patient.
Right, right.
Yes. Well, there's other people that think very highly of ketones and their potential. There's a Professor Theodore Van Italy. He's a professor emeritus at the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University in New York City. And he's currently chairman of the scientific committee and member of the editorial board of the International de Recherche Servier. And he, pardon my French, but he said that my view of the ketone ester story is that if the results in human subjects bear out the findings in laboratory animals, they could well be the major advance in nutrition in the 21st century. That's the major advance in the 21st century. That's astonishing.
I agree with that. You know,
Yes.
Shortly after I started researching this, reading Dr. Veach's articles about the therapeutic implications of ketone bodies,
Yes.
talking with Dr. Van Italy and Dr. George Cahill, who discovered that brain could use ketones, I was basically flabbergasted, you know, just amazed at the potential for this. I see potential for treating newborns. I have research projects swimming around in my brain all the time about how we could better the lives of premature newborns, help them have better outcomes by treating them in the beginning, you know, when they have problems with low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, very common, asphyxia, birth asphyxia, deprived of oxygen, in which cells can die. Premature babies, they're getting a product now intravenously that's 100% soybean oil. It's lacking medium-chain triglycerides, and some of these very tiny babies are not getting any medium-chain triglyceride for several weeks because their bowel is so immature they can't tolerate feedings. They would be getting this in their mother's milk. They would be making ketones. About 25% of the energy to the brain in a newborn during those early days comes from ketones normally, but they have no way to make it.
So they should be getting it instead of soybean oil.
Right. They should be getting some medium-chain triglycerides at least.
Yes.
So those kind of things need to change.
Yes.
There are so many applications for this that I truly believe that the ketone is going to come into the category on the order of something like penicillin or insulin.
Really?
As a drug,
that's significant.
a medication or a treatment that's going to have a tremendous effect on quality of human life in this next century.
And of course, Dr. Veach is still at the NIH, at the National Institute of Health. So this is it's done with the best of credentials and the best of scientists, all of this work. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Right. Yes, I agree with you completely on that.
Okay. In summary, then, you've worked with Steve very closely, and you found that the normal medications weren't able to reverse the Alzheimer's at all, that his testing became more and more critical, that clock drawing, that his MMSE became a lower level, and then you got a sudden improvement with the use of coconut oil, that his MMSE improved, that his clock drawing improved, and that there's been a gradual improvement since then, even though he's not back to his pre-Alzheimer's days. You can still hope that he'll move closer to that. And you also see great hope with the ester bodies being developed and tested by Dr. Veach, and there's increasing evidence, from dozens of people that are trying it on their Alzheimer's, their relatives with Alzheimer's. So what would you say we had a particular reason for getting together today.
Right.
How would you summarize our purpose in being here today?
Right. Literally over the last year since my husband, had this response to coconut oil, I've been on a mission to get this message out to as many people as possible. At first I felt like I lived in a parallel universe where I knew something that nobody else knew. Yes. It was quite an amazing feeling, and I felt that I needed to get this message out to people so that they could know about it and at least have the opportunity to try it. I felt like, what have you got to lose? So I've been on a mission since then to help spread that message to other people. And the other whole point is to try to get funding for Dr. Veach's research. This is so promising. It can't be ignored. It can't be ignored. It has to continue, for people like Steve and so many people. Almost everyone you talk to either has a family member or knows someone who has a family member with Alzheimer's disease. It's so prevalent, and it's just going to get worse and worse. So his research has to go on. He's getting up there in age. The other researchers you mentioned that we talked about are getting up there. This research cannot die with them, so to speak. It has to continue. So it's very important. It's urgent, that he get the funding as soon as possible, so that he can study this disease, and we can keep millions of more people dying from it, and save many, many, many trillions of neurons in the process. In the meantime. Yes,
that's wonderful. Thank you very much for allowing me to interview today, and it's been a revelation, and I hope that we can get the message out to a lot of people.
Mr. Lightburn, I want to thank you so much today, and your company, Nature's Approved and Assured Organics, for making this film to help this message get out to the millions of people who need it, and also to help get funding for Dr. Veach's research.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.